Well, thanks, Chad, and thanks everybody else on the panel and everybody who got up bright and early. One of the things I love about ASFPM is one of the earliest rising crowds of any conference. I think that's really awesome. The other thing I like about coming to this conference is it's such an amazingly informed crowd because of the nature of the work you do on the issues that I care so much about and NRDC cares so much about, namely issues around flood insurance, flood risk, and how we're going to start dealing with some of the challenges we have ahead. Real quick show of hands, although I can't see everybody because of the lights, but quick show of hands. How many people think flood insurance program as it exists today, absolutely perfect, spot on, no changes needed? How many people think some changes are needed? Raise those hands too. How many people are just undecided? I don't see everybody's hands go. Okay. So that's the first step of solving a problem, is recognizing that there is one. And I think we all know that the program we have is not necessarily the program we need going forward. So I think where we end up with on flood insurance reform in Congress is Congress has created a program and handed it off to FEMA, and now it's in David's capable care. It simply isn't working to meet our flood risk challenges today. And what really keeps me up at night is knowing that it certainly isn't up to meeting our flood risk challenges of the future. You know, when you look at the storms that the nation has experienced over the last just 2 years, and you think about what is in store as the climate changes and sea levels rise and flood risk begins to escalate, you know, we have a very big problem in our future around flooding. You know, just looking at sea level rise alone. You know, it used to be, not too long ago, that the kind of upper limit of what we thought was probable on sea level rise was about 3 feet. 3 feet now looks like locked in, depending on who you talk to in the scientific community. And 6 feet is starting to look like well within the realm of possibility. And that's just global average. You know, in some parts of the U.S., the northeastern United States in particular, you know, sea levels could rise another foot to 3 feet above that global average. So, you know, at the outer limits, we could be looking at up to, you know, 8, maybe even 9 feet of sea level rise somewhere between Virginia and Maine, which is a staggering problem to be addressing. And the flood insurance program, because it is structured to be one of the primary tools we use for dealing with flood risk, is going to need to be updated to reflect that growing reality. So the good news in Congress is that unlike the dynamic that seems to govern most decisions in Congress these days, flood insurance isn't bound up by the same kind of partisan tribal associations. If it's a Republican idea, the Democrats hate it. If it's a Democratic idea, the Republicans hate it. Flood insurance is one of these things, it's kind of an odd duck these days, where Democrats and Republicans are actually working together. There's a lot of agreement on what the solutions are. Party lines is less important. Unfortunately, that dynamic also works against it because there's also Republicans and Democrats working together to oppose some of those solutions. And there's bipartisanship on both sides of the discussion. But at least there is a discussion. But when we look at the flood insurance program we need versus the flood insurance program we have, I think there are two big areas that the Natural Resources Defense Council would love to see some major improvements in. One of those is just in the area of how information reaches people so they can make real life decisions about where they live and whether they should buy insurance and how they go about deciding where they're going to raise their families. So that starts with FEMA's flood maps. You know, I think the days of just relying on a line that defines the 100-year floodplain needs to be revisited. That line seems to be increasingly fuzzy given the trends we're seeing on flooding. And even if we got the line exactly right on a flood map, it's going to be out of date fairly quickly, especially in coastal areas as flood risks continue to elevate. The second area, I think we need to make it a lot easier for people to get information about about flood damages, flood risk, compliance at the community level with the standards of the flood insurance program. A lot of that information is kind of locked up behind in FEMA's databases, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get access to that information. That's information that planners can use, developers can use, architects, engineers. Knowing that you're building something in a neighborhood, it may look okay on the floodplain, but knowing that there's also like 100 repetitive loss properties in that area, that tells you something that the flood map isn't telling you something. That's a really nice piece of information to add to that. Knowing whether a community is rigorously enforcing the provisions of the flood insurance program, also really important to know. And also just making it possible for a homeowner to get information about their own home's past history of flood damages. If a person isn't legally required to buy flood insurance, but is wondering whether they should, having access to just a damage history would tell them a whole lot. And that's information that FEMA has. It's also information that private insurers are going to increasingly have. So we need to find a way of creating like a Carfax for homes that allows people to get that information to make more informed choices. And finally, we need to make sure that at a time of a real estate transaction or a rental agreement is being exercised, that a owner of a property discloses what they know about the property's flood history as well. A lot of states don't have good disclosure laws. Many do, and we need to make a more level playing field across the country. The final big thing that I think we need to do with the flood insurance program is we need to move away from the primary form of assistance being rebuilding. And we need to make it easier for people to look at other options, namely the possibility of getting a buyout and possibly relocating. The reason I say this is looking at the data on severe repetitive loss properties. These properties are really kind of a canary in the coal mine for climate change. 2015, FEMA had identified, since the program began, a little over 30,000 severe repetitive loss properties. On average, they flooded about 5 times. About 20% of them weren't even located in a 100-year floodplain. 3 years later, in 2018, before Hurricane Florence and Michael even hit, that number had risen to 36,000. So we've added 20% to the number of those properties in just, really just 2 to 3 years. And that trend is probably going to continue. As sea levels rise and tidal flooding increases, which we already see throughout coastal areas, there are going to be more and more properties that are in that situation. And simply paying billions of dollars a year to rebuild them probably isn't the best decision. But the way we currently offer assistance to people to relocate, if that's what they want to do, is a really laborious and time-intensive process. My colleague Anna Weber yesterday gave a presentation about just looking at how long a typical buyout project takes to complete under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program or the PDM program or FMA. And we need to do a better job of that. I think there's a really good role the flood insurance program can play by helping directly finance those types of transactions where it makes financial sense for the flood insurance program, where it reduces the potential for future damages and allows the program to help people do what they're inevitably going to have to do in the future, which is move out of harm's way. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation, and thank you very much.